Greetings, Assalamu alaikum, welcome everyone. My name is Saqib, your host on the Hikmah project. I pray you're all well. It's been quite some time, a bit of a break between the previous podcast that I've done and the one we're going to listen to today. So, how have you all been? Alhamdulillah, I've been well. Quite a bit going on in my life, I guess. So, but today, inshallah, we'll be speaking to Mark Silver on a heart-centered business. And what drew me to his work is the opening page. He dedicates his book, which is called Heart-Centered Business, to, and I'll quote, for Amin, whose example of being worthy of deep trust and love I strive to follow in commerce and in life. The peace and blessings of the one be upon him. End quote. So that's who he dedicates his book to, peace and blessings be upon him. And so that got me hooked, and I reached out, and alhamdulillah, I had a really good conversation with him. A very heart-centered conversation, I would say. So just a bit about Mark Silver. There's more information on the website in the podcast notes. He has worked with heart-centered entrepreneurs to help them realize the very act of business can be an act of love. And so that's essentially what his business is about. He's helping entrepreneurs to become more heart-centered. And Mark is one of the pioneers in integrating real spirituality with the nitty-gritty of small business. He founded Heart of Business in 2001, designated master teacher within his Sufi lineage. He has received his masters of divinity. As a coach, teacher and spiritual healer, he has facilitated thousands of individual sessions with entrepreneurs and has led hundreds of classes, seminars, groups and retreats. So there's more information about him. We start off by just talking a bit about his background and how he arrived at Sufism. It was at the hands of Sheikh Muhammad Jamal from Palestine, and being of a Jewish heritage, what drew him towards those teachings, and how he's managed that sort of transition or that journey. And also, we then go through the book. So I've selected various quotes, and I essentially ask him to give his commentary on various quotes throughout the book, so you get a feel of what he's doing. I'll leave details of his website, as I said, in the podcast notes, and feel free to reach out to him. I think he does run some courses to help budding entrepreneurs to fully take a more heart-centered approach towards their businesses. So that's it from me. That's the introduction. I hope you enjoy this podcast. If you are listening, please do subscribe and support the Hikmah project. It does help us develop further, and we are planning to develop some courses as well as some membership tiers to help make the Hikmah project more accessible, and more details about that in due course, inshallah. So without further ado, here's the podcast. So welcome, Mark. Welcome to the Hikmah project.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I'm really grateful that you invited me in.
Wonderful. So I've really been looking forward to this podcast, as you know, for quite some time now, and I'm so glad it's finally happened. So shall we just begin by just a brief introduction, maybe from yourself, about your journey towards Islam and Sufism?
Absolutely. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I was raised Jewish in a not very observant Jewish family, and I always had the belief or the dream that I would be a rabbi someday. And there's a lot of twists and turns in a person's spiritual journey. We could spend quite a lot of time, I'm sure, just talking about that. But what happened was we were part of a vibrant Jewish community in the Bay Area, my wife and I. And I was wanting something deeper. Like I was wanting, like I wasn't feeling of the depth that I was yearning for, and I kept hoping that I was going to reach that. And at the same time, I was just at the beginning of my journey with working with business owners. This was like in 2000, in the year 2000, and I was already running into folks who were, I mean, it's emotional. Businesses has all kinds of emotion, and I said to Holly, I need to know how to process people emotionally. Like I know how to care for them emotionally when running into business stuff. And she already had a healing practice, and she had a best friend who had another friend who was studying Sufism in the lineage of Sidi al-Jamal and the Shadali lineage. And and he and she had a profound experience with her, and I had a profound experience at a workshop with the teachers, and we both ended up studying in this lineage, in a healing school in this lineage. And at the beginning, I was bringing my siddur and making the Jewish prayers in the mosque while I was doing these studies, and I had this very strong, like, I like, I don't want to betray my genealogy. Like I don't want to betray my people. It's like, this is the path that I'm on. It's the path I've been given. And then it was very deep in prayer one day at the school, and I heard very clearly. I don't often get guidance in like clear words, but this came through in clear words. You're loving the path more than you're loving me. And it destroyed me, and I realized I was very attached to the path. And what happened then was me really embracing the path of Sufism. It wasn't too long after that, a year or two after that, that I took shahada. And then I started to feel this healing in my heart between Judaism and Islam in my heart. And I began to see that they're not two different paths. I mean, if you look at they're like peas in a pod. The teachings are the halal, kosher. It's like it's all the teachings are the same in so many ways. And I even was in a halwa with my sheikh, and in the middle of the night in a prayer, I saw this image. I saw the Yud He Vav He in Hebrew of the unutterable name of God, and the Tetragrammaton, and then I saw in Arabic Allah, and if you turn one of them upside down, they're the same physical shape. And we went to the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit in Seattle not too long after that, and ancient Hebrew is even closer, like the shapes are. Anyway, so for me, there's a deep healing that's needed in the Abrahamic lineage. I'm not saying that I'm the one bringing the healing to the lineage, but it's like in me personally, there was a deep healing in the lineage between, this false separation between Judaism and Islam. And I raised Jewish, went to Islam. I skipped over Christianity. I don't know much. I've studied some Christianity, but it's like I can't. It's not included in my personal journey. But and so I've been studying in Sufism, in Islamic Sufism ever since, but I don't not feel Jewish, if that makes sense. Like that's like the term Jufi has been used by a number of people, and so like I've been fasting for Ramadan, every year for 20 years now. It's like I definitely identify as Muslim, but I don't not identify as Jewish. And so it's been a very interesting journey for me internally. And so I la ilaha illallah. There's only one. There's only one.
And so just to um, expand on that point around idealizing the path over the real, over the truth, over the haq, over the divine. When, for our listeners who may not know of your sheikh or may not have met somebody of that caliber, of that spiritual station, um, surely what he must have offered you what was to embody some dimension of the real, which both was through a path yet transcended it.
Yes,
Am I correct? Could you say a bit more
yes.
about your
I,
engagement with the Sheikh and
I,
what was it that he brought you?
inshallah, absolutely. I was trying not to make it a super long story, but of course, you're right. It's a good element of my own journey. Um, so for a while, we were going to Jewish services, and then we were going to Sufi teachings. And the interesting thing is that they were teaching on the same themes week to week to week. It was incredible. Obviously, they weren't talking to each other. It was just but the experience that I had in my heart in the Sufi context. And I'm not saying that the Jewish teacher was any less deep, but for me and where Allah was leading me, my heart was deepened and touched so powerfully in the presence. And the Sheikh wasn't there. He was in Jerusalem. He lived in Jerusalem and traveled to the US for about a month out of the year. Um, when I met Sidi, as we called him, he passed in 2015. He called for anyone who wanted to take bayat, who wanted to take hand in lineage. And I had already done it through an intermediary teacher. I hadn't done it directly with him. And I felt this pull, like I had no control over my body. I felt like I was just pulled forward in front of him. And when I took bayat, I was just like buzzing. I don't have words to describe it. And then he gave me my Sufi name, Abdul Aziz, and I felt every cell in my body, like I just felt this inner shift. Probably familiar to others who've had experiences like that, and I can't explain it if you haven't tasted it. And then throughout my journey with Sufism, I've had quite a few of these experiences where some part of me melts away and I'm face to face with something well beyond me. Some more essential access to love, to oneness, to, I'm not going to make pretensions to saying I was face to face with Allah, but it's like there was some veils removed from my heart in a way that I was experiencing something much more directly than I had before. And it melted me. I mean, it destroyed me, it annihilated me at different points. There's several different very profound stories I've had, experiences. And yeah, I don't quite know what else to say about it, but there was, this has changed me and carried me over the last 20 years of 20 years, 24 years of being on this path. And there were plenty of times where I didn't want to, I'd much rather, my ego would much rather be Jewish, I mean, there's a way that feels more familiarly home, to myself, in terms of customs and et cetera. But I feel like I've been placed here, and I do my best to listen and surrender. So it's very, and I'm not fighting it. There have been times on the path when I was definitely in a fight and a struggle about where I'd been placed. Like, why here? Why, could have been a rabbi. But but I'm really quite content. It's really quite beautiful. And my heart drinks deeply, and I know that all of our hearts thirst to drink, and wherever the water comes from, the water is the water, whichever well it's coming out of. So,
Alhamdulillah.
mashallah.
So just now moving on to your book and the whole theme around heart-centered business. Before we dive into your book and pick various passages, could you just say something around this concept of heart-centered business? How did that come about?
Yeah.
And actually the subtitle is Healing from Toxic Business Culture so your small business can thrive. So could you say something around how this came about?
Yeah, I think that most people are aware of how incredibly toxic our economy and our business culture is and has been for a few hundred years. Like, it's modern capitalism, and commerce and trade have existed with humans for as long as humans have been around, right? As long as we've had some kind of culture. I mean, the Prophet alayhi salam, before he came into his prophethood, was a merchant. Amin, it's like there's always been some way for us to do indirect trade or to bring goods and services to each other. But the way that we've been doing it in this modern era has removed love. It's forgotten love. I can't say it's removed love, because you can't remove Allah. You can't remove al-Wadud. But it's been covered over and veiled and distorted and forgotten and not paid attention to, and it's killing us. It's killing us. It's pushing the environment to its limits, where we're seeing catastrophic climate change and species extinction at extreme levels. And it's all from the pursuit of profit. Countries turned, like democracies overturned, and people killed, and culture stolen from, and colonialism and the slave trade, and et cetera, et cetera. There's so many ills, and it all comes from this chasing profit in this particular way. And I won't say that, of course, there's been, human beings were not angelic always before the current one, but it's been particularly catastrophically and globally toxic. And one of the things that I know in my heart that is needed is that we need to have healing in business. It's not the only thing we need, but business needs to be healed, needs to be love needs to be called forth from within the heart of business, so that we can care for one another without, so that we can exchange goods and services without the need to harm or steal. And this is it's very deep in my heart. It feels very important. And the people who are doing the work that seems most necessary, not the global corporations, it's so many small businesses, and even people who are self-employed, who bring such heart and care to their communities, and have the things that they're doing are things that often are coming from a place of like just wanting to help, and some of these are very explicit in terms of people who are healers or doing, various kinds of holistic or spiritual healing. But even, and I say even, not to denigrate them, but, like my local plumber that we use, deeply caring person who just wants to, like, of course he wants to get paid, but the integrity that he and his son have, he just wants to make sure that we have water, that our family has water, and that we're, that our home is cared for. And this is, like, we could be living so vibrantly if there wasn't this distortion, and I would call it an evil distortion in the business culture.
Beautiful. So let's unpack that through a series of quotes from your book. I'm going to begin with the one that really struck me to my core. It was actually on the first page. So I'll read it out, and then I'll let your heart speak to expand. Bismillah. For Al-Amin, so this book is dedicated to, for Al-Amin, whose example of being worthy of deep trust and love I strive to follow in commerce and in life. The peace and blessings of the One be upon him. End quote. That's just so amazing. Mm.
SubhanAllah. Alayhi wasalam. I was on a call. It was a conference call. It was long before Zoom, years and years and years ago, of Sufis from different tariqat. It wasn't just our tariq, my tariqah, and somebody was saying, oh, it was a listserv. I'm sorry, it wasn't a. It was many moons ago. It was a listserv, and somebody was saying, we're all supposed to follow the example of the Sunnah. The Sunnah of the Prophet, alayhi salam, of course. But might it also be useful to follow the Sunnah of the Prophet before he attained his prophethood, since that's what we're moving towards, and not just after? Like we're trying to become that, and it was, it's like in his journey, in how Allah shaped him to be able to be the container for the prophecy, for his prophethood. And that struck me so deeply. And in reading about his life and how much he honored women and how much he honored his first wife, Khadija, and how much he, it's just, I remember thinking about what it meant to be a merchant in those times. I thought about okay, so if I'm going to be a merchant in these times, it means I'm going to, first of all, have a bunch of pack animals, camels, and I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, you have some things that you have spent. I mean, I'm a woodworker. I built things with my hands. I mean, not as a job, but it's a hobby of mine. It's like anybody who's built things with their hands knows how much work goes into building something of quality. And so if I go to someone and they have goods, maybe they've farmed, or maybe they've built something, or they've made some craft, and they want to sell it in a market, and they've poured their life into this. I mean, anybody who's at a garden too, how much work goes into this. This is not like just hitting, go on a 3D printer, right? It's like there's so much that goes into it. And then you're supposed to trust me enough that you're going to hand over all of this work, the majority of a year that you've probably spent. And I'm going to disappear with that for weeks or months. And then I'm going to come back and give you the profit from selling that in a market, and not steal from you, and give you fair for your goods. And, if I walk through that scenario and really live it, to be able to have that much trust with people, and that's the way it was done. And so it wasn't necessarily, it wasn't like he was the only one who had trust with people. There were lots of merchants that were trustworthy. But it's like for him to have earned that nickname, it just struck me so deeply. And I walked with that idea and that example. Like, what would it mean to walk with that much integrity in the world, that people would be willing to give that much of their preciousness, of their life energy, to me, and trust me with it? And what would it mean to be worthy of that? And it's so a lot of that is behind, it was behind that dedication. Subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Beautiful. That's such a profound vision you've just mentioned there. What would it mean to carry that level of integrity? That people can trust you completely and call you Al-Amin. I mean, that's a very high station. That's a very high level of attainment of character development. Beautiful. Right, the next quote, Bismillah. Love, if it were unleashed with strength, wisdom, and compassion, would annihilate the world of business as it is, turning it into something entirely different. If love had its way, business could be part of a culture and society that lifts us up and serves us all. Unquote.
One of the things I love very much about Sufism is the very strong language that gets used. Like there's no pulling punches. Like the concept of annihilation of fana is was one of the very first concepts I was introduced to. And it's like, yes, you will be annihilated many times. And it wasn't this like, oh, you'll be transformed or it'll be like a chrysalis. Like then nobody tried to pretty it up with metaphors or, pulling punches. It's like, no, it's annihilation. Yep. Destruction, and something new can come from that. Baqa after that. And so when I think about, one of the things that when I work with clients, when we work with our clients and people in our audience, the word love in English doesn't really, people don't often think about, meditate on what it really means. It often, when you say love, a lot of people think about, like a sappy greeting card or something that's very nice and soft. But I think almost any spiritual path, but my familiarity with Sufism is that, the love of Allah is what creates and recreates the world over and over again in every moment. And so it destroys and recreates and destroys. It's like there's such a generative force that we can't stand against. Like there's nothing that we can do that can hold against divine love. Like if divine love will have its way, full stop. And when I think about the times that I've allowed where love has moved through me and I've been, put into prostration, in my own heart, it changes everything. It changes everything. There was a moment in uh, in 2018 is probably a good example, is when the business wasn't working very well. We were hitting the limits of the business model we were using. There was like things were kind of gummed up, and we need a radical change. And I was afraid. It's like it's kind of working. So do you let go? Like what happens? And the process I went through in terms of prayer, in terms of facing the reality, was annihilating. And in a moment, everything was swept away. Like it took time, of course, to like put our current business model in place that we've been running since then, with our online membership community that's run Pay from the Heart. And, like there was a lot of surrender, but like in that moment, the old form of the business was just washed away. It still existed, but in my heart, it was washed away and the changes were already happening. And I know, like we've seen this at a higher level. Like I was just listening to a podcast. I wish I could remember the name. It was on the podcast Seen on Radio, and their current season this year is on capitalism. They started out with a story of like the youngest managing director in JP Morgan, the bank, the investment bank, JP Morgan, the youngest managing director in their firm's history, in a moment was kind of faced with the reality that what he was doing was destroying things in the world. And that moment was similar to my moment, and it took some time until the changes manifested. But he left JP Morgan and he started a whole institute that's like deeply critical of capitalism and bringing in other options. I mean, it's just annihilated the reality that he was living. And if enough of us allowed ourselves to be annihilated by love, it would the world of business would be unrecognizable, and the goodness that we would have access to, I think, is like it. I don't know if we could even imagine it from where we're sitting.
Mm.
You know.
Beautiful. So the next quote, this is about healing your relationship with business. So the quote is, "The essence of business doesn't lie in the things transacted, nor the elements of transaction, nor the individuals involved in transacting. The heart of business, rather, lies in the aliveness of the so-called space between. Its dynamic relationships, not particular things and persons and systems and structures that constitute the essence of business." That's really profound. I would just like to maybe comment on that before you do, just to add, some icing on the cake, so to speak. The dynamics, the heart of business rather lies in the aliveness of the so-called space between, you know, and one of the things I was reminded of was this book called Teal Organizations by Frederick Laulo, who talks about organizations that which are evolving based on our consciousness. And traditionally, models of organizations would be, say, for example, very top-down, hierarchical, authoritarian. And that's no longer working. It's starving the soul because people can't turn up completely as themselves. They have to leave part of themselves at home or outside of work because they're sort of in this industrial model. They're sort of acting as parts within a system. And so he's talking about teal organizations which are far more evolved. They're flatter, they're far more dynamic, and they represent the evolution of consciousness, adopt these new sort of paradigms, if you like. And so I was thinking around Uber and Airbnb. Uber doesn't own, as far as I know, a single taxi or car, and Airbnb doesn't own any physical hotels, yet they're the most thriving sort of business models, which only, say, 20 years ago didn't exist. And so there's something around the dynamics of things which is evolving and changing and shifting. So that's what it reminded me of. Um, yeah, over to yourself.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much to say there. I think. Let me say first that my opinion, my position is that both Uber and Airbnb are predatory models in ways that are not healthy for our culture. We've seen that because there have been unplanned, unintended consequences that could have been guessed at, but nobody took the time to really think it through in terms of what it did to the rental and the housing markets, and what it did to the livelihoods of taxi drivers, and just how we get around. There's been, and so there's problems in the I would like to say that because I think those are problematic business models to hold up as examples, but I think that it is interesting to think about, and the problem here is that these companies are attempting to own the relationships, and everything is a relationship, right? It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the earth, created the world, created the universe, created the physical reality because Allah was yearning to be known. And that in itself is a relationship. Like there's a like
Mm.
like we are our entire beings is in a dependent relationship with oneness. Like we are not, there's no part of anything that is independent. We are all bound together. Science talks about this, and certainly, all the spiritual paths that I know of talk about this. We're bound together. And this oneness is the haq. It is the reality. And so when we talk about anything, it's, wheresoever you turn, there is the face of Allah. It's like our businesses are the face of Allah. My laptop, this camera lens that I'm looking into is the face of Allah. You're the face of Allah. Like we're all expressions of the oneness. And so we're all in relationship to that. It's said that, we face Allah as children, or we face the dunya as equals. And so if we can't talk about things, like if we're going to be real, if we're going to really talk about the reality of something, we can't talk about a thing as if it has an existence separate from Allah. And so if we're going to talk about that thing, if we're going to talk about its reality, we can only talk about it as a relationship, as an expression of the oneness.
So, speaking of relationships, you seem to be reading my mind here, because you very beautifully touch on the next sort of theme I'm about to ask is actually about healthy relationships. And maybe for our listeners, it will be useful to know not just the metaphysics of the Sufi view of reality and nature, but also maybe, and this is just a suggestion, if something comes up around practical, what does it mean? How have you manifested this in your business? What does it mean practically? So the quote is, healthy businesses necessitate healthy relationships. Tolerating unhealthy relationships is not healthy for the business nor for you.
Yes, exactly. So, all of this for me comes back to the concept and the practice of adab, of right relationship. Sometimes that's translated as politeness, but I've always understood it more deeply as right relationship. And what is right relationship? Well, it depends on my proximity with Allah, depends on my proximity to a thing. So this doesn't mean that a healthy relationship doesn't necessitate that I'm lovey-dovey, friendly, warm with everybody. The reality of the physical world just means that, you and I can't easily go out for tea because we live in completely different countries. It's like, it's not, and there are lots of people that I've never even met. And so sometimes we have a healthy relationship that's a distant relationship, and sometimes we have a healthy relationship that's more proximal. And so when we talk about healthy relationships, so for instance, a lot of the people we work with have, challenges around having a healthy relationship. Oh, so many things, but let's say healthy relationship with money. So how do you have a healthy relationship with money? Well, first of all, we have to understand that money is, again, face of the divine. It's another expression of the divine. But it's not more or less than anything else. And that money as money only exists in the physical plane. There might be energy or divine qualities underneath it, but it's a physical thing. Like, it's only worth money in the physical world. And so if we give power to money that it doesn't have, that's idolizing it, right? That's an unhealthy relationship. So having a healthy relationship with money means to see the individual. Let me gather my thoughts here, because there is this tendency when we're facing a challenge to try to turn it into theory or a pattern or a larger picture. Like, how do I have a healthy relationship with money overall? That's like, how do I have a healthy relationship with humans overall? No, how do I have a healthy relationship with you is the
Mm.
question. So how do I have a healthy relationship with the money that my clients are paying me? How do I have a healthy relationship with the debt that I owe? If there's money on a credit card that I owe or a loan that I've taken out, that particular context requires me to face that relationship the same way I would face an individual person
Mm.
and say, okay, this is not about my overall relationship with money. There are places where I have a great relationship with money, but this particular debt triggers me, I feel powerless. I feel like it controls me, giving examples from our clients, like I feel like the bill comes and I have to pay it before everything else, and that it's this big pressure on me. This is giving our power away. This is an unhealthy relationship. And so being able to, first of all, stop, right? It's said that the only power that the self has is the power to cover over the truth. So we should use our willpower to stop ourselves and just pause and connect with Allah, connect in our hearts. We remember, is Allah present even here? Is love available even here, even in this debt? It's a question I like to ask is, and then face that debt. I can see how I've been giving my power away. What is it that my heart is wanting? Like if I were able to, like, by paying this debt off quickly, by giving it power, what is my heart trying to do? Oh, my heart's trying to gain safety. All right, so maybe the divine quality about Hafiz, maybe I can just go direct and just ask for Al-Hafiz in my heart and just call on the divine qualities and receive that in my heart and be with that in my heart. And as my heart fills with that, then when I look back at the debt, I no longer feel so collapsed. I feel like, oh, I'm already feeling safe. I have the safety of Allah. I have a connection with that in my heart. And so that means I'm more resourced. I can see the debt more clearly instead of through the eyes of fear or the eyes of someone who's enthralled to it. I can see it as, oh, yeah, it's just another part of the world. Okay, what's a healthy way to deal with this? Okay, I see I need to negotiate with them. I see that I need to figure out another payment plan. I see that I need to work with my revenue. I can start to see paths from a place of resourcefulness and a place of groundedness and a place of connection where my first connection is with Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the divine. Not everybody we work with, very few people we work with are Muslim. There's a lot of people from different paths, but it's like to work with the divine, the oneness, the mystery, God, whatever names people use for that. And then to connect with the deeper need that the heart is trying to get and let that fill. And then from that place of connection, it might be possible. It is possible. It's always possible to then find a healthier way to be with that thing or that person or that dynamic or that aspect of the business or whatever it is that we're facing.
Beautiful. Yes. To be with what is without being carried away by the momentum and the narrative and I'm just thinking of Quranic teachings around materialism and being piling up wealth until you arrive at the grave, where you've lost the plot, so to speak. Yes. Before we move on, there was something that came up, and it's the idea of your sustenance, and the Rabbul Alameen is the Lord sustainer of all the worlds, not just the Muslims or the Sufis, but everything in existence. And so my understanding is the provision comes in many manifestations, not just income, but knowledge, barakah, health, wealth, all sorts of things.
Community, friendship, family,
Friendship.
absolutely.
And often the Muslims that I'm aware of actually would talk about your rizq, your sustenance being written. Allah, in fact, there's a hadith al-Qudsi around asking God for that and making all your concerns a single concern, which I think is what you're saying essentially, is to go back to your heart, to the source, not to forget the source, no matter which situation you're in, whether you're in the marketplace or in a mosque, the remembrance of God is always present. And so the mundane can suddenly become quite sacred when you carry that remembrance and become that vessel for channeling something quite beautiful, remarkable, maybe out of this world, as you said, of the prophetic substance, Amin, that level of integrity. And many Muslims, in fact, many non-Muslims in the early stages of Islam, from Malaysia and the Far East, in India, for example, had actually converted because of the character of the Muslims during trade and business. They said, well, who are these people? What sort of religion is this? They forgive their debts. What's going on here? So, sorry, just going back, is around contentment. So obviously, I'm sure there's somebody running a business at the moment, planning to run a business. And I think it's a very important, and we know in the Sufi teachings, rida, being content with the divine will, whatever that is, seeing the manifestation of things as they are, and Allah putting you in certain situations. Can you say something around the journey of being content with provision and provision when running a business?
Yeah.
While at the same time, obviously, any sensible businessman would want to optimize their profits, would
Right.
want the best deal, the bargain, without, as you said earlier, a predatory mindset of,
Right.
you know, uh, using other people or resources, giving people their due. But obviously, you would want to make sure your business is thriving, not at the expense of other people in a negative way. But
Right.
at the same time, if it's not, to also be content, saying, this is what Allah has written for me. I'm content with as much or as little as whatever provision comes my way.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's one of the teachings is, be um, uh, expectant of the generosity and content with the decree. So
Mm,
there's a tension in our humanity, right? Because we don't know what's written. We don't know maktub. We don't know what's in the book. We don't know what Allah has
mm,
is providing for us, and um, uh, and as long as what we're working with in the world, like you were saying, is halal, it's like we're not harming people, we're in integrity, um, and we're caring for the poor and for the orphan and for the travelers and for the, and as long as we're fulfilling our collective care, then we can, um, you know, uh, enjoy the goodness of the earth, right? This is
mm.
another, um, uh, um, oh my goodness, my brain, the word, where's the word? I know oh my God. Anyway, it's saying of the prophet. Hadith Qudsi. I can't believe the word hadith went out of my brain. But anyway, hadith Qudsi is like, I'm going to mangle it entirely, and I can only render it in English anyway. But it's like, I've created this world for your pleasure, and I've created you for my delight. Therefore, don't spoil what is for me with what is for you.
Mm,
And so there is this understanding that we're meant to enjoy this world as long as we're not harming ourselves or others. We're spoiling ourselves. And so we can have fun. Like if we're truly caring for people and we're like in a just society, there's nobody who's going hungry, there's nobody without a home, there's nobody that's, everyone's being cared for. The society is small enough that people know each other and nobody's being forgotten. If we're and business is not taking it, like part of the issue is scale. Like that's a whole nother conversation, is scale. The scale that that business has taken on speaks to a tremendous egocentrism, an aspiring to godlike powers, to control the earth, and to try to create new things, not just combine things that are here, which is creativity, but to like actually try to be the creator of it's like it's completely out of bounds. And but if business was actually in its rightful place and not affecting the whole of culture so deeply, then we can have fun with business. If we know that if something goes wrong, people aren't going to starve and that we're going to care for each other, then yes, we can have fun. It can be a little bit of a game. We can accumulate wealth and then give a good portion of it to make sure other people are not hurting. And so I think it's a little off track of what you're asking, but it's like, and I'm kind of leaning into a vision of a more just society. But because we don't know what Allah is providing for us, then yes, it's like, yeah, let's try to make our businesses work as good as we can. Let's try to make sure that we're cared for and our families are cared for and our loved ones are cared for, and let's do that. And then if it doesn't work, yes, we want to be searching for knowledge. We want to be learning. We want to be bettering ourselves. And like, are there things I need to learn about business? Are there mechanics and strategies and just understandings of how to be in this relationship? It's like, I think that there's a way that people can be too like disconnected from the word, from what's written, and just saying, I can do whatever I want. I can create everything. But on the other end, people can be so collapsed and say like, oh, well, whatever happens, it's God's will. It's like, well, yeah, but if you learned a little bit about business, you wouldn't be, it's like, it doesn't have to be that bad. It's like you can, it's like you can learn things, you can learn how to, and we love gardening. We have a little bit of property and we grow things. It's like, we're trying to learn how to care for the soil and how to care for the plants so that they can actually produce food and so that they can be healthy and vibrant. And so we learn those things. We don't just plop a plant in the ground and throw our hands up and say, oh, well, it's the will of God, whether it lives or dies. Like, we're part of the divine expression. And what we do matters. How we contribute matters. It's not like we're separate from God and everything else that happens is God's will and we're kind of some island. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. So we are the Khalifa, the co-creators, or if you like, the servants, the people who carry the instruments who carry the peace, the creativity. Yes. And
Inshallah.
just on that note, another thought that's come up is in your subtitle, you mentioned healing from toxic business culture so your small business can thrive.
Yes.
And I just want to explore that a bit, because when you said small business can thrive, just going back to what you said earlier about having something of value, of integrity and ethics, it's honest, it's empowering, it's beautiful, it's whole. And in terms of our contemporary time, two people I listen to at times, Mehdi Hassan and Wajahat Ali, both in the media, reporting on news, have set up their own sort of smaller, if you like, startups of the news of what's actually going on in Mehdi Hassan's case in the Palestine Israel situation, and with Wajahat Ali, I think he's basically exploring the non-conventional sort of narrative. And I think both of them have an argument that the media gets hijacked or has its own bias of looking at things. And so in speaking their truth, they've had issues in the organizations they've worked with, or at least with Mehdi Hassan. I know he's had issues with his news channel, with his own channel, and so he's sort of left and moved on and developed something so that he can speak from what he sees as an authentic voice to cover what is going on without worrying about, you know, giving us a twist or a slant, or to not be truthful to how to the reality of the situation. So is that is there something to be said around corporate businesses and ethics being almost mutually exclusive? Is there something to be said around, do you have big businesses that are actually really ethical? Can that happen? Or is there something around smaller businesses having more of the human element, especially the startups, which
Hmm.
don't have some of the corporate powers, which, as you said earlier, uh, you know,
Yeah.
you need healing in those sorts of organizations. So is it smaller businesses that will carry this beauty, this integrity that you're talking about, this love?
It's a beautiful question you ask, and it's a really complex and large topic. So let me see if I can name a few things that can be helpful. I think, like, the conclusions that I've come to in the studies I've done is that there is an inherent problem with scale. When you get beyond a certain size, and there's not like a line in the sand, I can't define that, but there's like you get beyond a certain size, and what happens is that you can no longer care for the relationships with the kind of individual care that's needed in any relationship of integrity, you know? So I'll give you an example. We have uh, our poor tiny little company. We have like just a few people, and almost everyone has been struck by some kind of bereavement in the last few weeks. It's been really wild and painful, and um, and so there's needed to be a lot of compassion and spaciousness. It's like we're not counting days off. It's like, yes, you're getting paid and you get time off and you go care for your family and what's going on with you. And it's like, if you're distracted and upset, yeah, we're going to understand that you're not going to be at your best, and nor should you be. And so if you find
Mm,
yourself unable to work, stop working, go
mm,
grieve, go cry, go do whatever you need to do, get a hug, take a walk.
mm,
Like when we have smaller scale organizations,
mm,
communities, people know one another, and we can create that kind of space. When you start to get beyond a certain size, the organizations, in order to function with the kind of efficiency that they want to function at, which is a choice, they have to rely on rules and bureaucracy
mm,
rather than relationships.
mm,
And when you start to introduce rules and bureaucracy to govern human need, something breaks. I'm
mm,
convinced that something breaks. I don't know any policy that would have handled the particular perfect storm of events that happened to us in the last couple of weeks, where suddenly nobody could work except me and my wife, because we weren't personally, it's like, I mean, what do? You push back deadlines, you explain to clients, you slow down,
mm,
you don't count personal days off. You're not counting, oh, you're using personal days off. Someone died. I'm not going to count personal days off. It's like,
mm,
you grieve, it's like,
mm,
and yes, the business has to function, but they care. Like my job as the leader of the company has been most often to tell my people to slow down and not work so hard, not work on the weekends, not work at night, not try to make up for lost hours, but to like care for themselves, because they care and they want to do a good job. When you have a bureaucracy and rules that are governing relationships, people get hurt.
Mm.
Something breaks. There's a disconnection that happens. What gets prioritized is the efficiency of how wealth is extracted, not the beauty and the vitality of the relationships of the people that are involved.
Mm.
And I'm not, like I said, I don't know exactly where that line is. There's been studies done about the, the number that, it's like somewhere around 200 and 220 or 250. It's like there's a point beyond which you can't know everybody individually. Like the brain isn't wired that way. And I will also add to that, there's so much, there's scholarship and books and things that I would want to list. There's a whole, like there's a lot to be said on this topic. But, and I alluded to this earlier, is that if a commercial business becomes large enough that it has power to direct how a community functions, it's too large. Everyone in the community needs to be equals, right? We face the divine as children, we face each other as equals. If there is a concern, if there's a person that holds, a corporate power. I mean, this is one of the distortions that happened, was the invention of the corporation that lives forever and never dies and doesn't have, and absolves people involved with it of responsibility. Like it's like, it's like, what is that? That's a shaitan. Like this, I don't know what to say, anyway, there's things to be said about that. I don't mean to get too extreme in my language, but I want to say that if we're really talking about creating a just society where people are cared for, there are certain things that would need to change. And scale is one of the things that I raise my eyebrow at and I look very carefully at. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes. So another quote. Curiosity is a critical human capacity, and cultivating curiosity is one of the most powerful antidotes to shame. It shifts the internal narrative in a way that softens judgment and opens the heart to both truth and possibility. Curiosity brings healing. End quote. So I'll just sub comment, if you like, or footnote comment, just to add, yes, but I'm also, my curiosity is, how does this relate to business? How has this passage come about?
Yeah. So so many people are caught in shame. I don't believe that shame is an emotion. I think that shame is a story we tell ourselves to protect ourselves from raw emotions. So for instance, if we make a mistake or we do something that causes a problem or doesn't have an intended result, we may have, like, the raw emotions involved with that may be anger, maybe sadness, maybe grief, maybe frustration, maybe like there's fear. There's all kinds of things that can come up that are just these raw emotions. But what shame does is shame says, you know what? You are broken. You are irredeemable. This is, of course, it happened this way because you're worthless. And it feels terrible, but it distances us. It protects us in a strange way from those raw emotions. It makes it impossible to learn. It makes it impossible to learn. One of the Sufi teachings that my Sheikh Sidi, told us, is that, if human beings didn't make mistakes, the divine would have created an entire other race of beings that did make mistakes. Like how else do we learn the divine quality of forgiveness if we don't make a mistake in order to be able to experience the experience of return, right? It's like it's the only way that we can come to wholeness and completion and to truly know Allah is to make mistakes. It's a gateway of growth. And this happens over and over and over again in our lives. If we hit shame instead of curiosity, like, then how do we learn? How do we learn from our mistakes? How do we grow? Yes, we may have harmed somebody with our mistake, and we may need to make restitution. We may need to, we may feel remorse, which is a healthy feeling, remorse. Oh my God, I hurt you. I'm so sorry. How do I make this up to you? How do I care for you in that mistake? But even that allows me to say, wow, how did I harm this person? How did this happen? How do we then try to avoid that in the future? How do we then learn from that? And I once had, I was once teaching a workshop in front of a full room, and I was talking about mistakes, and somebody raised their hand and said, I finally understand. You're up there and I'm down here because you were willing to make more mistakes than I was. And I'm like, yeah, I got to get over my fear of mistakes at some point. And so many mistakes every day. And so the healing that's possible is this possibility of coming to wholeness and this possibility of learning, but this intensely practical thing of how are we ever, whoever does something well the first time they do it, right? First time you try to sell an offer, the first time you try to create content for your website, the first time you try to promote something, the first time you try to put a system in place to handle something. I created a system. We're doing some marketing now, and I created a system, and I made a mistake, and a message went out to a dear friend of mine, but it was a message that was really crafted for people that don't know me. And it really, he was like, Mark, this kind of sucked to get this message from you. And I'm like, it did suck. I was a terrible mistake. I messed up with this system. And I explained it. And I said, I'm really sorry. And thank you for being a true friend and telling me. If I had been ashamed, I might have shrunken. I might have turned away. I might have cut off conversation. I might have been defensive and not talked to him. But instead, because I was like, oh, how did this happen? I felt remorse, but I was also laughing a little bit because it wasn't that harmful. And he was, he was like, this kind of sucked. It kind of did suck. But then I had curiosity, and then I can fix the system, and then our marketing works better.
And I was just thinking, imagine the impact that must have in a culture of a business when your manager gives you permission to fail and obviously learn from it, not just to keep on making the same mistakes again, but having that curiosity to then learn, but not shame you or label you or judge you based on that failure. If somebody went out and didn't make the profit they were expecting, not to belittle them or to judge them, but to actually use that as a growth. That in itself really would bring a very transformative, powerful, healing energy in that culture, I would imagine.
Yeah, so this is what we do in our company. So our current operations person, we hired, God, has it been 2 years already? The person we had before was retiring and, spending time with grandkids and going off doing their own thing. And we hired this person, our new operations person. And I sat and I watched, and I waited until they made their first mistake. And then we celebrated. I said, you made your first mistake. Yes. And we made a big deal out of it, and we celebrated, and we said, yes, everybody makes mistakes. We knew you were going to make a mistake. Of course, I want you to know that mistakes are totally welcome here. Of course, we don't want you doing it on purpose. That's not a mistake. That's like sabotage, like, can we talk about what's going on if that's happening? But it's like, we celebrated the mistake because I wanted her to value, I wanted to value her engagement and her trusting herself and her being willing to take some risks, because without that, then I become a micromanager, and then she's doing her job, not trying to do the best job possible, but trying to avoid making mistakes, which is a different thing. And when you're trying to avoid making mistakes as opposed to trying to do the best thing possible, everything gets smaller and the possibilities close down and opportunities close down.
It reminded me of a saying, I believe is attributed to Imam Ali, that the the sin or the mistake which fills you with repentance and hence the door to Allah is better than the good action which fills you with pride.
Yes, I love that.
And
That's
so
beautiful.
it's also an example of how the divine works in mysterious ways, in that he, as you mentioned earlier, wheresoever you turn, there is the face of God. So what may not be apparent, somebody could be going to the mosque, for example, to pray, but who knows whether those prayers have been accepted. That could be to show off or to further feed their egos of being very religious or spiritual or pious. Whereas the person in complete neediness could have, who might have missed that prayer for whatever reason, but has that repentance, might bring down the mercy and forgiveness of God in a very mysterious way.
Exactly. Exactly. I yes.
And so
Yeah.
here's another quote, and this time I'd like to ask you, what happens if you have this perspective, and what happens if you don't? If there are personal stories, I think that's
Mhm.
really beautiful, like the one you just mentioned earlier about celebrating the first mistake. So this quote is, quote, "Your client is an expression of the source of love. Your colleague is also an expression of that same source. Your web designer, your laptop, your money, all the things, and your business itself are expressions of the source." End quote. So what happens if you're veiled from the source of love? And what
Mm.
happens when you're unveiled?
Everything goes to crap. um, you know, if I fall into fear, like if we have a marketing campaign that's not going well, let's say, and the revenue isn't where I want it to be, and there's fear that comes in, and I forget, I go into forgetfulness, and I forget that Allah is present in these different aspects. I forget that things are written. I forget that there's ways to learn. Then I can treat people badly. I can shut down. I can um, there are times where I've been so frustrated or scared or disconnected in a moment that I'll snap at my wife, or I'll snap at one of my kids. And then I have to go and apologize and say, God, that wasn't your fault. That wasn't your fault at all. It was me. I was scared, or I was messed up. And, and um, that's also where I can, end up harming relationships in the workplace. I can blame somebody. I can blame myself. I can, it's like, and then what that does is it really undermines everything. It undermines the trust. Every time I blame someone or I come down on someone and I forget that they're a divine being, then I treat them more like a thing,
Hmm.
and the relationship becomes more transactional, and the sacredness and the devotion are missing, and people can feel that. When I say sacredness and devotion, like, it doesn't even have to be an enlightened state. Lord knows I'm not walking around in an enlightened state. Astaghfirullah, if I sound like I'm representing myself that way, forget that. But I mean, just like care, just having like care and decency towards another human being. People know when they're not being cared for, if they're being treated
Hmm.
badly. You know, there's been time. It's been very rare, thankfully, where I've said something to one of our assistant, to an assistant, somebody on our team, and I'm like, "What happened there?" And I realize there's like a tone in my voice. And I'm like, I just want to apologize. Like, you're not at fault. Like, I don't hold you to blame. I was frustrated and nervous about this other thing, and it came out of my voice. And I don't want you to feel like I'm blaming you at all. I know you're doing your best. And, there's certainly room to make mistakes with people, but there are limits to how much you can make those mistakes and preserve trust.
Hmm.
It's like, a few mistakes, done with care, done with, rapid cleanup, doesn't really break trust. Sometimes it can increase trust
Mm.
because it's like, oh, when they mess up, they clean up. So that's good. But if you're always messing up and always cleaning up,
Mm.
then people begin to expect the mess up, and then trust
Mm.
is lost.
Alhamdulillah. So to sum up, if I just um, share my understanding of what I've learned during this podcast and talking to you, is that the business world, one perspective we can take as people of who carry uh, who are on the journey to evolving in consciousness, is to see through the paradigm of relationships and to bring integrity, health, well-being, almost being custodians. As we are custodians of the earth, we are custodians of that transaction of the other, and wanting the best for them, um, and working to bring that integrity, and realizing, especially if you're a mystic or a Sufi, is that the divine realm is not absent from that interaction. As the Hadith al-Qudsi says, I was hungry, you did not come to feed me, etc., etc. And so realizing the divine face and the divine will is present in everything, in every interaction, in every transaction that's going on, and how we can bring and that can be transformative. A business doesn't need to be just about making money. It can be something higher, in which money is a part of that process, so we don't need to shy away from that, but it's done with a higher purpose. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
And love is a core ingredient for us to tap into and to be able to serve, and um, uh, to it becomes a form of worship, fundamentally, if you bring that. I think there are hadiths around going out to earn a living, is like ibadah, or um, everything is in a state of worship, but you don't understand it. But so if somebody is being very true to their inner nature, and they're engaging with every being in that state of remembrance, knowing the divine face and will is never absent from any situation, then they're in a state of zikr, so.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I will say that we, um, just in the interest of compassion, that we would hope to hold that, but hopefully, it's like to hold that in every moment is obviously, the job of a saint,
Yeah.
and one of the awliya of Allah, and those of us who are lowly mortals, are going to forget a lot, but we can have it in our intention to remember, to be in remembrance as
Mm.
much as we can, and in the forgetfulness, the practice of remembrance, the practice of dhikr, means that when we forget, that that habit is engraved in us, and we come back to the remembrance hopefully much sooner,
Mm.
um, than not. And yeah.
Alhamdulillah. And so can I just ask, I think a really burning question, maybe I should have asked this at the beginning, is you mentioned your business,
Yes.
and I would like to know more about that. I'm sure listeners would like to know more about it.
Yeah.
So say I'm starting up a business, or a service, maybe might be another word, and whether it's a one-man band, or a freelance, or something small where I just want to do something on the side. What service how can you support me? What's your business about?
Yeah.
And and how does your book tie into that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I really appreciate it. This is the Hikmah project. And so we've been talking on a very kind of esoteric level, which I love. It's very fun. We're very, very practical. Like I mentioned before, I love gardening. I love woodworking. Previous career as a paramedic, I'm very practical. I love playing in business and making it work, especially when somebody is doing their heart work, bringing something that they really care about and that is helping people, making the world a better place in some way. And so, usually one of the early steps that people do is they either read my book or they'll take our online assessment or both to kind of discover what stage their business is in and to understand the stages of business. It's one of the chapters in the book. It describes the stages that a small business moves through, from creation into concentration to momentum. There's a lot to describe there, so I won't go into it right now, but and then depending on what stage you're in, a lot of people in the earlier to middle stages, we have an online learning community that is really designed to help people in that way. I could go on and on about the structures that are there. There's a compassion and accountability structure. There's learning modules that teach the different aspects of business in detail with principles and templates and such. There's live calls, multiple live calls every week to support people. There's a lot of spiritual nourishment. There's deepening calls. We help guide people into their own hearts to hear their own guidance, as well as give external coaching and support. Every other month, I lead a virtual retreat, 24-hour virtual retreat to spend committed spiritual practice time. And we have people from many, many different paths and no paths at all that come together to spend time in their heart with their business, to listen very deeply. And we work with people there. For people that are in more advanced stages of business development, I do have small group coaching, and I do work with a select number of individual clients. And then we have a number of, there's usually 3 classes a year that we lead in a kind of a public facing way that anybody can join. They're like 8-week classes that teach some of the fundamentals of business, and it's a way for people to kind of get a taste of what we're doing in addition to all the free stuff. So
Wonderful. And presumably, if listeners want to learn more, they can simply go to your website.
Artofbusiness.com. Yes.
Artofbusiness.com. I'll put a link at the bottom of the webpage and in the podcast link. And so just before we finished, I just wanted to ask, I think that's a really interesting concept around retreat and working. So you're a coach who works with people to help them cultivate a heart-centered business, essentially.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the retreat. That's really interesting. And people from different paths or no paths sort of coming together. And it reminded me, I think it was Bill Gates, who takes time off quite regularly, who goes into sort of isolation with his favorite sort of books that he hasn't read and simply works through. He has this, and simply Google, for example, have this playtime where people get to be creative and just work on anything which is not on the agenda, something they want to develop. And so you have that time, that's unstructured time, if you like, where you can go within and bring out something, could you say a bit more about that space?
Yeah. So when I was first doing my Sufi training in 2000, and then through getting my Master's of Divinity, anyway, there came a time where I was no longer every quarter spending a week immersed with my teachers, and I was like, "Oh, that's not going to fly," And I didn't. When kids were young, I didn't want to take the resources of like leaving my wife on her own to go do a retreat, at a retreat center. And so I'm like, we do distance healing. We work over the phone. At that time, it was conference calls or phone calls, not Zoom. But anyway, world moves on. And so I said, well, I wonder if we could do a virtual retreat. I wonder what that would look like. And so I put one together, and it was really profound. It was profound for me. It was profound for the other people. For the participants, I do it because it helps hold me accountable to taking that time. Usually one of the major things that mistakes people make is that every time they touch their business, they think they have to be productive. I have to get something done. Instead of taking time to just be and listen, We do have to do, there's plenty of things to do and get done, but without the listening, it tends to be a little frantic and like unfocused and unproductive. And so I started doing this in 2005. Every 6 times a year, every other month, we take a day and we do this. I've led over 100 of them at this point, and they're just really profound. There's time for remembrance. There's time, I lead Sufi practices on the calls during the retreat, but there's a lot of time off the calls for people to follow their own spiritual practices from their own traditions. And then there's time for heart sharing, and it's like people benefit deeply. There's healing, and people get insights, and they get, tajalli, they get, downloads around, it becomes much easier to make high stakes choices when you take that space. And so that's something that we provide to everyone who's in our community. It's just part of it.
Beautiful. Mark Silva or Abdulaziz, thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you and to be speaking to you, and inshallah I look forward to more engagements in the future.
I am so touched, and I'm so grateful for what you're carrying in the world and what you're doing here with the Hikmah Project. And so I'm just grateful to be invited in, and thank you for the space you're holding and the work you're doing.
Thank you. Barakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.